Hello and welcome. You're listening to the Tasty Tidbits podcast. Get ready to receive rich, well seasoned, and tasteful tidbits to transform your life. Each week, Dr. Tiffany comes to you with inspirational encouragement and thought provoking interviews to help revolutionize your walk with God. Are you hungry for more of His presence? Then get ready. And now, your host, author, intuitive life coach, and pastor, Dr. Tiffany Watkins.
Hello, everyone, and welcome again to Tasty Tidbits. I am your host, Dr. Tiffany Watkins, and I'm so excited to have you here on another episode today. Today, we're going to be talking about Transformed by Fire, and we have a very special guest today that is going to be with us, and he has a powerful testimony that he can share with us on today and actually give us some helpful tools on how to be transformed with any fire that you may be going through. But before we get started, I want to tell you a little bit about our guest. And his name is Tony Stoltzfus. And Tony has spent 25 years training Christian life coaches and coaching professionally. He specialized in working with senior leaders in painful transitions. He launched multiple training organizations and has written over 21 books that have sold over 300,000 copies. He's been through losing his home and belongings in a forest fire, major betrayals, losing access to his network and life works at one point, and learned how to meet God no matter what comes his way. His life message is, there is nothing that can happen to you that God won't make something beautiful out of it. And so thank you for being a part of the podcast today, Tony. How are you today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on.
Good. So today we're talking about Transformed by Fire. And I know this is a very important topic because we've all gone through our, trials and tribulations. And, some of the listeners may be listening now and just going through their own personal fires. But you asked God, when I was reading, I noticed that you had asked God if you could really live without all of your stuff. And then 3 weeks later, your house burned down in a forest fire. So tell us about that experience and how that transformed you.
Yeah, so we live in Redding, California. It's surrounded by mountains on three sides. So beautiful place. And we had a house out in the country with a gorgeous view of Mount Shasta, 14,000 foot peak and Mount Lassen. Anyway, I was out in the yard one day praying and thinking about life. And I was just like, Jesus, could I really live without all this stuff? Um, and it wasn't it was more just a question for me than it was for Jesus. Um, but 3 weeks later, oh, this is a difficult period of life. I'm coming home. The, so I'm flying back home the day before one of my kids had done the conversation with dad where they tell you everything that you did wrong as a parent and how you've damaged them. One of my adult children. So we fly back home and there's a fire and it's, what, 10, 12 miles away on the other side of a reservoir. So I wasn't particularly worried. Went to bed and in the morning I got up and was laying in bed and pulled out my iPad to check on the fire and it had come all the way around the lake, and we had a mandatory evacuation notice. So me and my son quick piled into the car. I took our computers and the drawer that had our business files. I just took the whole drawer and threw it in the car. We still hadn't unpacked our suitcases, so we each left with a suitcase of dirty clothes, our computers, and our dog. And I was Mr. Practical. I didn't take any of the you know, family mementos, or I didn't take our wedding vows that we had framed on the wall, or the videos of our kids, or anything like that. And we evacuated to the far side of town. I have a picture. The next morning, the guy's house we were staying at, there were 12 cars in the driveway, and he had people staying in every bedroom, in the dining room, in the living room, and the because half the town evacuated eventually, 40,000 people in the middle of the night. Um, but we didn't know anything. And
Mhm.
one of the things about forest fires is you can't track exactly did my house survive or not. So we get a house, we're staying in there, and you just don't know. Is Am I going to go back to my life or is my life gone?
Mhm.
And one of the unfortunately, I can't go into this in detail because of I one of my kids tried to walk through the fire to our house to find out if it was burned or not,
Mm.
and was gone for 8 hours, and I didn't know where they were. And you can't call the police. You can't call anybody because half the town is evacuated. The police are already working 18 hours a day or 20 hours a day, and he disappeared. Um, and so my worst moment in the fire experience was my child is missing, and I don't have no idea where they are and if they've gone off and done something to themselves or what. Um, so finally, yeah, that ended at 12:30 in the morning.
Mhm.
But um, so about a week later, a retired firefighter offered to drive me out there, and you're driving through, everything is smoky. Like a forest fire, it turns the place into a desert. Everything is ash. And we drive
Mhm.
up the road to my house, and there's a pile of rubble. And it was stucco, so one wall of the stucco was still standing. All the insulation and the wood and everything was burned out. But there was one hollow wall of stucco. Um, the dishes were still in the dishwasher, but if you picked them up, they fell apart in your
Mm.
hand because the heat had. Um, so there was literally nothing left. And in terms of dealing with it, like I was traumatized. I was a math major in college, and
Mhm.
I went to fill out a form, for housing, and I couldn't multiply two numbers. And I was like, okay, my brain is not working right. Um, and we spent over a month living in other people's houses.
Mm.
Um, just, the grace of some friends and stuff like that. Um, uh, I remember being in church that first Sunday, and it was like, there was a glory cloud in the church, except it was haze from the smoke because the whole town is smoky. So the sanctuary has this haze in it. Um, and the pastor, uh, his home survived. He was right on the edge of the fire. And he talked about how he was traumatized too. He told his wife that he'd been to the house and it was okay, and I've got the cheese. And he had brought a hunk of cheese out of the refrigerator for some odd reason. Your brain just isn't working. Um, so I think, there's a lot that happened. Um, my wife was going through some mental health challenges at the time. Um, my other child blocked me on the phone right during this. We got in a new house and it flooded. A pipe broke upstairs and all the water came through the ceiling directly on top of our book inventory because we were running a bookstore and we had like $40,000 worth of books. And water is coming through the ceiling. It's splashing all
Mm.
over at 4 a.m. Um, my best friend died on the 1 year anniversary of the fire. I was on the way to his funeral, and my wife's mom died. So I just went from one funeral to the next. Um, and I got to this place. I took one of those stress inventories, that counselors give you, and I was
Mm-hmm.
off the scale stress. And the assessment didn't even have an entry for a natural disaster. So even
Mm,
without the fire, I told people the fire was the fourth most stressful thing that happened in my life that year. Um, so even without the fire, I got to the place where I was fairly debilitated. And I've spent a career helping people through their worst moments in life, and I got a ton of tools to work at it, and it still pushed me beyond my ability to cope.
mm-hmm.
And it took about 3 years to recover. Um, my prayer life during that time looked a lot like, okay, God, I got nothing. I know I can talk to you and you'll talk back, and that I can ask you a question and you'll answer me, but I just don't feel like talking.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and he would say, it's okay, trust the process.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I felt, I've spent a career creating communities for people, but my community was largely absent for me. Part of the
Mm-hmm.
problem was a lot of my community was virtual. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I went through a couple years where I didn't really want to be around people. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm fine to be around people. I can laugh and joke and whatever, but my desire for that was just about zero. Um, so there's the catastrophe. What did God do? Well, I figured out pretty quickly on that yes, I can live without all this stuff. It's just stuff. And I was a furniture designer, so I made a solid cherry table for my wife for our engagement. And I had all these beautiful things that I made that were ash. And one of the first things I figured out was it's not having the thing that gives me life, it's the fact that I made it. And nobody can take that
Mm-hmm.
from me. And a fire
Mm-hmm.
can't take that from me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I pretty quickly came to peace about the things that I made. Um, I think that the larger story of the whole thing parallels the story of Job. And people don't understand Job very well. Most people read Job and think, okay, here's a guy that suffered injustice and then God met him. Great. What you don't understand is Job was this anal, um, he was making sacrifices to God all the time just in case his kids did something wrong. So he's obsessed with right and wrong, and his integrity is his lifeline. That's what he feels that his integrity is the thing that is the foundation of his relationship with God, and he would rather die than say that he lacks integrity. Um, his integrity became an idol, and his wife knows it. And she's like, why do you hold on to your integrity? Curse God and die, which isn't the most helpful thing to say. But his wife understands the issue. You've made integrity your source of righteousness. And what happens for Job in this story is he gets the thing that he always longed for and could never find. And that was peace with God, even when he didn't do it right. And at the end of the story, he's he's completely blown it and knows it. He's been an utter jerk. And God says, I approve you. And that was the thing he most longed for in life. And through pain, he got that. And for me, I think the thing I most longed for was very similar to Job, was peace with God.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was a little boy, the defense mechanism I took on was I will be a good boy, so I'll never have to experience the pain of that I feel when I've done something wrong, that seared conscious feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And to be able to go to God and say, I have nothing, and I don't even want to be with you. And for him to say, it's okay, has given me a peace that I never had and always longed for.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Tony,
So,
that's awesome because one of the things that you said, and I believe that God understands that, is that when we go through our most difficult times and our most challenging times, we may be at that place where we don't have anything to say to God. And so that
right,
time is the most important time because oftentimes that's when Jesus can truly love on you
right,
and just begin the healing process. Within us, and sometimes society makes us feel like we just have to be this perfect person always, knowing how to respond and what to say at the right time, and it's not always that simple. I was just sharing with someone the other day. They were getting ready to lose their house, and I said I told them I was sorry and I was praying for them, um and that God would be on the other side. I say, but you might not want to hear this right now because sometimes you just don't know what to say. And she started laughing, and I said, and I understand that because we've all been there, to the point where you just don't have anything to say. But I believe, and Tony, you might agree with me, at those times, it's often good not to have much to say because then truly that healing process from God can come in, and our trust in Him, we can just see Him manifest and unfold in ways that we didn't know that He would begin to unfold and change things in our lives. And it causes us to look at things in a different perspective.
yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, if someone is suffering, you're not qualified to speak to them unless you've gone through the same thing. And
Right.
the people who've gone through the same thing often have little to say because they understand that there's no words that can make it better. Um,
Hmm.
what your
Hmm.
heart longs for when you're hurt is to be known and to be valued and to be comforted.
Hmm.
Um, and
That's so good. Hmm.
we ask for everybody who's suffering at some point asks why. Why did this happen to me, God? Why did you do this? Where were you? And the reason we ask that is because we think if I know why it happened, I can protect myself in the future. I can keep this from happening to me again. And so God very rarely answers the question why in the midst of suffering because it allows us to take control of the situation, be our own protector instead of leaning on Him. So when you're suffering, if you ask God why, you'll probably be shouting into the void. What you want to do is say, Jesus, how are you here with me?
Hmm.
Jesus, what comfort do you have for me in the midst of this? Jesus, what do you want to say to my heart about how valuable I am to you? Those
Hmm.
questions he'll answer. Uh, the why question, not so much.
Hmm. Hmm. So, Tony, in your experience, what do you feel the roles of trials in the pruning process and even the waiting plays in shaping our character and our calling?
Well, you win your ministry in I've often said you win your ministry in your transitions, your valley seasons,
Hmm.
because what God will do through you, He first does in you. And so
Hmm.
it's often predictive. And as a coach, if a person is in a valley season, I'll be saying, okay, what's he doing in you? What's happening inside you? Okay, this is the thing that he's going to do through you in the next 10 years. So you're winning that. If God is teaching you to be at peace in the middle of this, guess what? You're going to have a line of people who need peace in the middle of this when you get out of it. So we have a tendency when we're in a valley season. I have a book on this. It's called The Calling Journey that helps you map your whole life with valleys and productive seasons. But a productive season is one where you co-labor with God and the focus is on your outward what you're doing. A valley season is where God removes productivity from your life to do inward renovation. So in the productive seasons, you're co-laboring. In the valley seasons, you're laying on the operating table and God is doing his thing with very little help from you. Um, and most people, when they go through a valley season, spend the first year or two resisting the process.
Mm-hmm.
Something
Mm-hmm.
was removed from me, productivity was removed from me to make room for this process. And, maybe I lost a role or a job or something significant to me. And our first impulse is to try to get that thing back. So I go out there and I'm applying for a million jobs and I'm, trying to find a new ministry role or I'm, whatever. And one of the signs that this is a valley season is that every door shuts in your face. Um, so most people resist at first. After you've been through several valley seasons, you start to recognize the pattern. But
Mm-hmm.
what you want to do in a valley season is lean into what God is doing and say, okay, God, you're doing something by removing this from me. I accept that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and if this is the kind of circumstance that is gonna do your work, give me more. Um, which is a real dangerous prayer, but you wanna get in line with the process instead of fighting it. Because if you
Mm-hmm.
kick back against the goads were sharp sticks that they used to get an animal to move. And if you kick back against the goad, you're driving the sharp stick into your leg. Um, and most of the pain people experience in valley seasons is self-inflicted. It's not the loss itself, it's the question of what this loss says about who I am.
Mm-hmm.
If I lose my role, then who am I? Because I thought the role defined me. And God is saying, no, I want to redefine you. Who are you
Mm-hmm.
without this role?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's kind of how those seasons work.
That's good. That's good. And how can someone surrender areas of their life, that are hard to release and trust God, during that personal transformation journey?
Well, the number one thing is saying, okay, God, I see that you're doing something here and I'm not going to fight you because
Mm-hmm.
you don't make the release happen. God does.
Mm-hmm.
um, God does the thing that you can't do for yourself. So often, my prayer in a season like that is, God, do in me the things I can't do for myself. Um, I'm inviting Him to change me and letting go of the reins of the change process. So you don't have to make it happen. You don't have to be in charge. You have to let go and trust. And
Mm-hmm.
so some of your most beautiful um, Jesus longs to be believed in. That's one of his deep desires. So when you're in the middle of something difficult, something really painful, and you say, Jesus, I trust you, that is worth so much to his heart. He is so filled by that and so blessed. You can touch the heart of God. He came to earth and died to have a relationship with you because he wants to connect with your heart. And when you trust him in the darkness, there's just, it's so precious to Jesus. And you can ask him, Jesus, I feel really bereft and like nothing good is happening in my life, but I trust you. What does that mean to you? And he'll tell you. Um, One of the things I've learned to do is I call this praying your desire, where you take the longings of your heart and you take those to Jesus. And you don't ask for a thing in this world. God, take the suffering away so I will at peace. God, give me this so I'll be at peace. God, give me a car or a house so I'll feel secure. You pray, Jesus, how are you my security? And when you take your desire directly to Him, my experience has, when I started praying that way, my percentage of answered prayer went up like 1,000%. Um, and I was like, oh, so this is what you want to talk about. It's not all the, what should I do today? And should I make this choice? And I asked those questions and I got to pray for 3 days to get an answer. But if I say, Jesus, what do you like about me? I hear something in 30 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that's the prayer that he most longs for.
Mm-hmm. That was going to be my next question, Tony, because you often say, that hearing God's voice is simpler than many people realize. Um, what makes his voice so accessible? And you talked about it a little bit, but can you show us a little bit
Yeah.
more about what that means?
Okay, so we have a set of deep desires that drive our behavior for love, belonging, acceptance, significance, challenge, peace, security, goodness. So anything you do has one of those desires under it. Either you're reaching for the desire or you're trying to keep something from taking the desire from you. And what we tend to do as Christians is we ask God for a thing in this world that will give us the desire. So let's say, here's a young person who really wants to be married and have a family. Oh God, send me the spouse that you have for me. We probably all know people who've prayed that prayer for years. Um, but what is it that they really want? Maybe their
Mm-hmm.
picture of marriage is one of belonging or being accepted or being loved. So what they've done is they've made marriage an idol. They're asking for
Mm-hmm.
a thing in this world that will satisfy their heart instead of taking the desire to Jesus. And this is James 4. What causes wars and fightings among you? It's your desires that are at war in your members inside of you. You
Mm-hmm.
covet and don't obtain, so you fight and wage war. And then James, who's probably the most hardcore guy in the New Testament, gives his answer, you have not because you ask not, which is a wildly misquoted verse. But
Mm-hmm.
in the context, what he's saying is you don't have your desire because you don't ask God for your desire. Instead, you ask for something in this world that becomes an idol to you. So
Mm-hmm.
if you want to get married, don't ask God for a marriage partner.
Mm-hmm.
Say, Jesus, here's what marriage represents to my heart. How do you
Mm-hmm.
want to be that to me? How do I belong to you, Jesus? Why did you choose me to be on your team?
Mm-hmm.
And when you meet Jesus there and your desire is first attached to Jesus, then Jesus can give you marriage without it becoming an idol. Because there's this rule of twisted desire. If you attach your desire to something in this world, it actually turns around and bites you and keeps you from getting the thing you most want.
Mm-hmm.
So the gal who deeply wants to be married compromises to get that and ends up in a marriage where she's abused and it gives her the opposite of what she really wanted.
Mm-hmm.
So Jesus, your desires were meant to be filled in your relationship with Jesus. And there are practical ways you can do that if you understand the difference between the desire and the thing. You can
Mm-hmm.
meet him there. And once you do, and he's first in your heart in that area, then he can give you. So just a story behind that, because you shouldn't talk about these things if you get them. The girl that I was most interested in, who was in Oklahoma, Um, and we wrote epistles to each other, when we were young about what God was doing. But one day I get a letter from her that she's seeing this guy. And 6 weeks later I get a letter from her that she's engaged. And I'm walking to work that day. I'm passing the courthouse square. I still remember where I was when I read the letter. And it was just like there was a moment of this such clear choice in front of me. Is Jesus Lord in this or isn't he? And I got to the shop where I was working. It was a wood shop, and I went out in the woods behind the shop, and I just danced before the Lord and worshiped for 10 minutes and said, "You're my God and you're enough for me, and I want to be married to you." And I went back and forgot about it. And 6 months later, she broke up with the guy and moved to Indiana, where I was.
Mm.
She's been my wife for 37 years. But
Wow.
both of us had experiences that God led us through of giving up the marriage dream and letting Him be Lord. And that was the foundation of a good marriage because we both said, "You're my source and not this person."
Hmm. Tony, that was just transformational, because that's so important. And sometimes we focus so much on what we desire, like you said, that you actually don't get it because it's just an idol to you. And so that's something that I think is great that you point out because, Jesus should be our source, the one who we love and the one who we um, acknowledge in all things. But the
Right,
world and so many things around us serves us so many other things, but we have to begin to go back to God, and just begin to, be comforted in Him,
right,
and trust that He knows what's best for us. And not only that, to be patient and knowing that God's timing is a perfect timing.
right.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing about your heart learns by experience, not from words and concepts. So
Mm-hmm.
we can say, you gotta, Jesus has to be your source. But if you don't have a mechanism to actually experience that, the words will have zero impact on your
Mm-hmm.
life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So the beauty of praying your desire is it gives you a mechanism to experience Jesus meeting your needs right in the moment. Um, just a quick plug, there's a free mobile app called Questions for Jesus, and it takes every passage in, I think it's Matthew, where Jesus speaks to a desire, and it gives you 5 questions to ask and plays soaking music while you listen, and then there's a place to journal your answer. So that's a good resource for learning how to ask questions for Jesus.
Mm-hmm. And then that'll put also it will put to work what you were just talking about in that process, and it's actually reshaping the way we pray and how we talk to
Right,
Jesus. Yeah.
right.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to ask you one more question because I was thinking about this, and you had mentioned it. And this is in the form of discipline, going a little bit different. Why does self-discipline fail, so often? And can we as listeners do differently?
Okay. So very simple. You have two parts of your brain. You have an emotional brain and a rational brain, and they do different things. If somebody throws a baseball and it's going to hit you in your head, it's your emotional brain that gets your head out of the way because your rational brain is too slow to calculate the trajectory and figure this all out. Um, your emotional brain is fast and imprecise, and it works by associating situations with emotions. So, like if you were chased on your paper route by a dog and you were scared,
Mm-hmm.
um, from then on, every time you see a dog, your emotional brain will go, "Oh, dog, fear." And it will make you afraid until you break that association between dogs and fear. Um, your rational brain calculates through things and figures it out. But here's why discipline doesn't work. Discipline is a rational brain tool. It doesn't work for emotional brain issues. So you can't discipline yourself to not be afraid very effectively. You can't discipline yourself to feel certain things. And part of it is because your emotional or your rational brain's about 3 seconds slower than your emotional brain. So by the time your rational brain says, "Oh, I shouldn't be afraid," you're already full blown feeling the fear. So since your emotional brain learns through experience, to change it, you have to have different experiences. Um, so just deciding you're going to be different won't change it.
Mm-hmm.
So inner healing, for instance, if I do inner healing from my experience as a child with the dog, what happens is we go back into the memory where that association is between the emotion and the event, and we bring Jesus into it, and we have a different experience within that memory where Jesus protects us or gives us peace. And then the next time we see a dog, our emotional brain remembers the encounter with Jesus and we're at peace. So we've broken the association.
Mm,
But you can't discipline yourself to not be afraid of dogs. You can only have a different experience to change it. Because if you discipline it, what you're doing is the feeling is still there, you're just putting a lid on it.
mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm,
eventually the lid's going to get blown off.
mm-hmm. That's so good. When you were talking about that, Tony, I thought about an issue when I was in high school and, I was working at a restaurant and they had cheese sticks there. And so during that time, I was sick and didn't realize it. And so I was trying to eat a cheese stick and got sick everywhere.
Oh
And it was
no.
like for a long time, I did not want to eat cheese sticks. The way my brain associated it, I could not eat cheese sticks. And so it was kind of a funny example about what you're saying, which is so true. And so you have to be able to do that. And I love how you say bringing Jesus into it because he is the true source of all of our deliverance and inner healing.
Yeah. And
Hmm.
just a further note on that, when you get to heaven, there's going to be a washing of memories where Jesus walks through your whole life with you and shows you where he was in every event and every feeling and every situation. And he's going to break every association in your memories between your heart and evil. So you will never get triggered in heaven because Jesus will have washed all of your memory and filled it with himself.
Amen. Wow. Wow, that is amazing. Well, thank you so much, Tony, for just
Yeah.
being able to share the heart of God on today with the listeners today. And I know some may be listening that may be experiencing some trials or, just going through and having a hard time. Would you pray for those that may be listening right now?
Well, I don't pray for people much anymore because I don't want to have an encounter for them. I want to have them have an encounter. So I'll give you a question for Jesus that you can pray and you can encounter God. And what you
Mm-hmm.
do is you just ask this simple question and you wait 30 seconds to listen. You don't listen longer than that because the first thing that comes to you is usually the best. So, um, why don't you ask him this? Jesus, how do you love me in the middle of this trial? What is in
Mm-hmm.
your heart toward me in this moment? So just sit
Mm-hmm.
with that for 30 seconds, and whatever comes into your heart, whatever you see or feel or sense, jot it down or tell someone. Because a man believes in his heart and so is saved, but confesses with his lips. There's something that happens when you take your internal conversation with Jesus and you bring it into the external world, that it becomes more real. So ask the question, jot down your answer, tell somebody.
Amen. 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 Well, this has been so great, Tony, and we just have been so blessed to have you a part of the podcast today. If listeners wanted to reach out to you today, what is the best way they can reach out to you?
Well, I got 21 books that they can read. Search for me on Amazon or whatever, Tony Stolzfus. I run online Bible study and book studies. I've got 5 of them going on right now. But if you're interested in a heaven book story, go to heavenexperience.net. I also have a program called How to Read the Bible Like a Human Being that's about visualizing stories from the New Testament. I spent 3 years full time researching this, 4 months in Israel, but that website is likeahumanbeing.com. So if you go there, there's a place you can sign up. And if you want to come to a study that I'm leading online, you can do that.
Amen.
And
Amen.
it's
And
free.
listeners, Yes, and he said free. So, listeners, we will have also his information in the show notes so that you're able to be able to click on those links or be able to Google those links and go straight directly to him in order to plug into what Tony is doing. And so, we thank you for being a part of the podcast today. And until next time, God bless. Bye bye.
Thank you for listening to Tasty Tidbits. If you're enjoying the show, feel free to subscribe, rate, and share with your friends. To learn more about Dr. Tiffany, check her out on Linktree at dr.tiffanywatkins or visit her website, iridescencebytiffany.com. Until next time, stay blessed.